I think there's just one set of minutes for March 17th that's been sent out to you. I'm sure if you had anything, you would already turn it in, but just checking before we approve them. Not seeing anything, I'll entertain a motion. Representative Clark makes a motion to approve the minutes. Representative Thomas seconds. Discussion. Seeing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Ayes have it. All right. We are ready to get into our first hearing. And I now open up the hearing for Senate Bill 185. Nick, can you give us a brief overview? Thank you, Nick.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So Senate Bill 185 would amend the registration requirements of sign language interpreters within the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. So with this registration of interpreters language, this would insert some new sections of law. In new section 1 of the bill, it would provide that sign language interpreters would be required to register with the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing for the purpose of providing interpreting services in any court proceeding or in compliance with state or federal law. The interpreter would be required to submit an application, do an application fee as set by rules and regulations of the commission. There's set requirements for registration of these interpreters, including a high school diploma, 18 years of age or older, no disqualifying conduct, and also obtaining a certification or other appropriate credentials. The commission would be authorized to grant reciprocal registration or temporary registration to people who are licensed in another state. There could be registration renewal processes established by the commission, and also the commission would be authorized to undertake criminal history records checks with local law enforcement agencies to check the backgrounds of individuals. The commission would also be authorized to refuse to issue, reinstate, or renew a registration upon certain conditions being found. And Section 1 would also require that the executive director of the commission adopt rules and regulations concerning the registration of interpreters and oversight of those interpreters. And the specifics of those rules and regulations are set out in the bill of what would be required. In Section 2 of the bill, it would make it unlawful for any person who is not registered with the commission to practice as an interpreter, to hold oneself out as having the intention, authority, or skill to interpret, or to provide remote and video interpreting services, or indicate that the person is registered with the commission. It would also make it unlawful for any entity to cause or permit an unregistered person to interpret, represent that an unregistered person is a registered interpreter, hold out to the public that an unregistered person has the authority, skill, or knowledge to interpret, or accept payment for securing a court-appointed interpreter if the person is not registered. The prohibitions that I just listed in this section would not apply to any person or entity that interprets during a religious event, interprets as a volunteer without compensation, if approved by the commission, interprets during an emergency until a registered interpreter can be obtained, or for students who are training to be an interpreter under the supervision of a registered interpreter. In Section 3 of the bill, it would require the commission to develop and administer a program relating to guidelines for the utilization of communication access services, communication access service providers, and interpreter service agencies. So the commission would be authorized to adopt rules and regulations on these services, including program fees, qualifications of access service providers, minimum training standards, and the other requirements are listed in the bill as well under Section 3. Again, similar to previous section, this Section 3 would also allow the commission to require communication access service providers to undergo criminal history records checks. Section 4 of the bill would establish the Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Fee Fund, and any monies collected pursuant to registration fees or any charges or penalties that would be assessed would be remitted to this fund. And the bill would authorize the commission to use monies in the fund to carry out the powers, duties, and functions of the commission. Section 8 of the bill would amend current state law to include in the following the powers and duties of the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. So current law provides their powers and duties. This would include that the commission could develop and oversee programs concerning interpreters, affiliate with any professional organization related to the functions of the commission, and undertake any other actions necessary to administer the commission's statutory functions. And I know that was very quick and fast overview, Mr. Chair. This bill would become effective upon publication in the statute book, and I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Nick, remind me and the committee, this bill did pass out of this committee and just didn't get above the line because of COVID issues, right?
I believe so. Let me check on that, and I can update the committee on that in a brief minute.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep going on with questions, and then you can just get back to us as we wrap up with questions. But questions from the committee for Nick. Representative Byers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick, I didn't see this, but is there a provision in here in the case of an educational interpreter that would allow for a substitute who may not quite have met the requirements yet? Or do they have to be also registered with the interpreting services?
I believe the bill would require that you would need to be registered as an interpreter, unless it's one of those exceptions. Maybe interpreting as a volunteer without compensation after receiving approval from the commission or the executive director. You could qualify under that. Or maybe if it's an emergency situation, though, a substitute might not be. I mean, I guess it could in certain circumstances be an emergency situation. So, but it would have to probably qualify under one of those exceptions.
I asked because of when I was working in education, we had interpretive services, educational interpreters, but sometimes we would have a substitute that would have to come in because someone was ill, and that person was currently undergoing training through Butler County Community College, but hadn't completed all their training yet, but they were okay enough to work as a substitute interpreter. And so that's why I was just curious as to see if there was a provision along those lines for that, since there are so few interpreters in the state.
Certainly, and there is one other exception for a student who is enrolled in and pursuing a degree in interpreting under the supervision of the commission, and essentially acting as a provisional interpreter under the supervision of a registered interpreter. So as long as that requirement is met, that exception could apply and allow interpreter in that case.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and get into proponent testimony. And first up is Chris Daly. Welcome to the committee, Chris.
Allison, you're muted.
Allison, you're muted.
My apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
And again, hello. My name is Chris Daly, and good afternoon, Representative Hubert and members of the House Education Committee. Thank you so much for your time today. I am the chair of ks.gov, Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and I have been involved in the commission since 2014. ks.gov is an independent and autonomous organization that is currently administratively housed under the Department of Children and Family Services. ks.gov plays a vital role in the lives of Kansans all over the state, those who are deaf those individuals who are hard of hearing, those who are late deafened, those who are deafblind, and even those who are hearing, such as people who can hear, but who have possibly a family member or a parent who is deaf or hard of hearing, or have a deaf or hard of hearing child. So we also work with entities and businesses who provide employment to deaf individuals and hard of hearing individuals. The initial 4 groups, as abbreviated above in my statement, represents those of all ages from birth all the way up to senior citizens. And these cut across all demographics and participate in various work areas, educational settings, and those that exist within our towns and our cities all over the state. They have varying needs. Some may have special needs. Some may have special challenges. They are ranging also in their languages, and some fluent and some not fluent. They also range in their preferences on how they prefer to communicate or access information, such as some use sign language, such as myself. Some prefer captioning. Some prefer to utilize hearing aids or other assistive devices. KCDHH does indeed serve a broad and diverse deaf and hard of hearing community within the mainstream society. And to be clear, KCDHH functions as an advocacy and a coordinating agency to best serve deaf and hard of hearing individuals by advocating for and facilitating equal and equitable access so that they can participate and be publicly available. So just for one example, during the pandemic, KCDHH did respond to when the governor was giving press conferences. There was an outcry saying that people could not access her press conferences. KCDHH reached out to the governor's office to offer their assistance and help them understand how they can best meet the needs of the deaf and hard of hearing community to achieve their communication needs. KCDHH also works with other health departments, and they were ordering clear masks during the pandemic to make sure that those who rely on lip reading skills were able to access communication. KCDHH also responds KCHH follows a mandate and has since that was established in the 1980s. And so that is why we are here today. We need to update the statutory language. So your support today will help us achieve those updates and remove outdated information that are obstacles, and in 2 important ways. In one way, it will help to clarify the needs of communication access services that are provided with those individuals who are providing services being registered with the commission. So that way the commission can ensure that those individuals meet the qualification standards that are expected of them to provide quality services. And that truly does protect all interested parties who are involved, the deaf and hard of hearing participants, and also the businesses and the entities who hire these individual interpreters. For example, yourselves who have hired the interpreters today. You do want to ensure that they are qualified, correct? Also, it does protect the interpreters and their profession and their standards, just to ensure that there are no unqualified interpreters who are going against the standards. We have countless of stories of unqualified interpreters who say, I am here, I can interpret, and it has caused a lot of harmful results. Just to give you an example, The Tampa Police Department in Florida obtained a person who said that they could interpret to stand in front of countless people at a televised press conference, and the results were catastrophic. There was a lot of complaints that came in that this individual could not even sign, and it was a very embarrassing situation for that department. So our goal is to prevent that from happening and to make sure that any service provider is meeting the qualified standards. If you can imagine that happening in an emergency room or within a courtroom setting where critical and immediate information has to be conveyed. A second area that your support will help us is to clarify and many misinterpretations that ks.gov and DCF. We have tried to have worked together, but have come to the place where we agree that legislation is important for clarification. So with many of our years of work between ks.gov and DCF leadership and the Kansas Attorney General's office and the Kansas Secretary and the Office of the Reviser, we do feel that we have the best possible bill that we are presenting to you today for your support. Thank you for your time. The end of my remarks.
Thank you. We'll hold questions until all conferees have, proponents have spoken. Next up is Robert Cooper. Welcome to the committee, Robert.
Mr. Chairman, this is Representative Samsel. We're having some bandwidth issues. If it's possible for anyone who doesn't need the video, that's helped in the past if we could turn the video off for those working virtually. I apologize for the request.
We will try to accommodate you, and if you are online, log off. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That should improve audio quality, we hope. Thank you.
Hello and good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Hubert and members of the House Education Committee. I am pleased to be here with you today. My name is Robert Cooper, and I am the Executive Director of Kansas Commission for the Deaf of Hard of Hearing, which is based here in Topeka. We do assist many other state organizations and state businesses to provide and ensure communication access that is available for all deaf and hard of hearing individuals, and also communication access being the key #1 component. We are comprised of a board of 17 members, 12 of which are appointed by the governor. 5 hold ex officio positions and represent different state agencies across the state. The commission was established in '82 to adhere to and coordinate a registration and certification of Kansas interpreters. We initially were one of 6 states to create a compact for quality assurance screening exam, which then expanded and grew to 13 states that joined the compact. In about the time frame of the year 2000, several states wanted to return to their own registration recommendation system. And so the compact disbanded and every state went back to their own individual procedures. So then the name of the testing became the Kansas Assurance Quality Screening, KQAS. Then in the year 2014, the commission reevaluated where we were at the time, other states turning more and more to the national certification and credentialing bodies. So then we switched from offering the certification exam to a registration system. At that time, we were recognizing that states operating individual state certification systems were very restrictive to individual interpreters and those who could be traveling in or out of the state. It would be easier to recognize the national certifying and credentialing body for reciprocity and for fluidity in recognizing qualifications. So we had already have impact statewide. Those state agencies had who employ folks whether they didn't know whether the interpreters that they were employing were qualified or not. So then in 1992, there was further legislation that was passed to give the executive director and a program of registration accountability and responsibility. However, the problem in 1992's legislation was misconstrued that it did not apply to courts. And so now that was House Bill. Interpreter is going to ask for clarification. Excuse me. Okay, so in fast forwarding to our statute KSA 75, 43, 55, A through D, which did now include clarification for the court systems to be able to adhere to the statutes. So interpreters across the state were required to either hold a certification or a registration by KCDHH, and that was from 1993 on. Many years have passed since that time, and then in 2014, there began to be issues. And as far as changing from the registration to regulations, DCF implied that KCDHH was not allowed to do that, which is contrary to the statute. So we were feeling that the statutes possibly were not spelled out clearly enough. So that was where we transitioned from the testing certification fees to registration fees. And again, DCF told us no, that the law clearly states in their interpretation that we were not allowed to do that. So that led us to trying to also establish background checks and fingerprinting in 2018. DCF had that authority, but felt that that did not apply to KCDHH or interpreters. So we had decided to submit our questions to the Attorney General. And back in 2018, the Attorney General finally released their opinion in February of 2020. And then that was their original House Bill 230 that we tried to initiate last year, but then COVID again stopped all processes moving forward. So we are back here in front of you today to our reattempt of our Senate bill. So it now is 185. So again, to clarify that KCDHH does have the opportunity and the authority to repurpose those certification fees to registration fees, and to make sure that we are here asking for your support today. As I had mentioned, the House bill had required all interpreters, or I'm sorry, excuse me, that the state statute had already given KCDH the authority to establish fees for interpreters to register in the state and possibly provide more support for those who are entering the field, and also to recognize endorsements for interpreters in the field. This could also possibly include those who are providing video remote interpreting services to ensure quality. We'd also like to add the fingerprinting and the background check requirement for that communication access services. Fingerprinting and the background checks, a lot of hospitals and businesses currently require their employees or their staff or their vendors to go through said processes. However, it is not applying or applicable to interpreters who are outside entities or not staff members of that agency. So how can you ensure that that interpreter who is coming into that situation is qualified? So again, interpreters are often left alone with children or with vulnerable parties. So that is an increased risk. So if courts or federals or state entities are requiring all parties to have a background check or fingerprints, we will be behind the curve. And so we're wanting to open a centralized point of contact here so that all interpreters will go through this background check and have fingerprints. So we will have them ready at a moment's notice so that entities and businesses are not waiting on interpreters to have that background check. So that is not fair to delay that communication access for the deaf and hard of hearing community. So we need to press on further and make sure that this is complete. Another important portion of the communication access is to give options. That there is not enough attention given to expanding communication options to the community. Not every deaf or hard of hearing person uses a sign language interpreter. There are deaf-blind individuals who use entities or service providers called SSPs. And so we are also looking to expand options for all members, businesses, agencies, schools to have full access of whatever choice that they make. For 6 years, the commission has worked in collaboration and has been in constant dialogue with a lot of folks and discovered that this bill is our best chance to clarify the authority. And so that is why we are before you today. We ask for your support and thank you for your time and attention, and I will stand for any questions. I believe I will leave the video on. I don't want to turn it off.
We have one more conferee, Stacy Storm, as a proponent. Welcome to the committee, Stacy.
Hello. Hello, Representative. Thank you so much. Before I start, should I leave my video on since I'll be speaking, or should I turn it off? Okay. Just want to make sure all the technology is at its best. All right. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak today in support of Senate Bill 185, which my colleagues have already stated clarifies the authority of the commission. I have worked as a credentialed interpreter since 1986 and as an interpreter educator since 1996. I'm honored to be serving my second year on the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, representing the perspectives and interests of interpreters working in the state. I also currently chair the Interpreter Review Committee, and prior to being appointed on the commission, I served in multiple capacities, working a great deal and very closely with the committee that Mr. Cooper mentioned, that looked at the ks certification process and has gotten us where we are today. One of the responsibilities of the commission is to define a fair and ethical interpreting registry system that will ensure deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind Kansans have equitable access via qualified interpreting. An effective registration system requires guidelines and criteria that both protect the rights of deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind individuals, ensuring no harm will be done to them by way of unethical and unqualified interpreters, while also providing a fair and equitable system available to those individuals who desire to do the work of interpreting, who want to pursue this as a career. This is a responsibility of the commission that we take very seriously. As you may suspect, the work of interpreting is quite complex. It requires more than simply being fluent in English and American Sign Language. Interpreters must possess specialized knowledge and skills that allow them to facilitate communication access in settings including deeply personal and intimate spaces, high-stakes situations, life-changing interactions, as well as public events. I'd like to quote Bill Milios, who's a deaf man, and he presented at a conference that I attended. It's a very well-known conference for interpreters, because I believe he states the experience that many deaf individuals have with interpreters. He said, interpreters have been in my life from childbirth to funerals and everything in between. I remember a story by a friend. He talked about his very first photo when he was born. The photo taken was of him, his mother, and the interpreter who was there for the birth. So my question, Mr. Bilios poses, for interpreters are, do you recognize the impact you have on the lives of deaf people? Do you realize the access you have to another person's life? Have you as individuals ever consciously made yourself vulnerable to that degree? Have you ever put your lives in someone else's hands like deaf people do every day? Have you ever had to trust someone ever as much as we trust our interpreters? Mr. Milios goes on in his presentation to address the importance of credentialing for interpreters. We cannot ignore that certification or credentialing with ethical practice systems provides protection for the deaf consumer. If a given interpreter chooses not to be credentialed, then I, or Mr. Milios, is not protected. Our deaf children are not protected. No deaf consumers are protected. I believe this is a critical perspective for us to consider in passage of this bill. He captures key elements of the transactions between deaf people and interpreters well. And it falls on the shoulders of KCDHH to maintain a registration system that protects deaf Kansans while also supporting the integrity of the interpreting profession. It's unreasonable to expect employers, medical professionals, service providers, and consumers, whether they be deaf or hearing, to understand the complexities of vetting interpreter skills to ensure they have hired a qualified interpreter. The KCDHH has the expertise necessary to ensure such a system that minimizes potential harm and barriers of access for all parties, while also supporting the individuals who strive to achieve and maintain the skills and knowledge needed to provide this essential service of ASL English interpreting. As a committee member asked earlier, the educational setting, K through 12 environments, as of now, we do include in the registration system considerations for K through 12 settings. And we are very committed to working with the Kansas Department of Education to ensure that children have access to their education. We know very, very much so the issues of shortages of qualified interpreters to work in K through 12 settings. So I request your support of this bill so that KCDHH can uphold and carry out the honorable responsibility of protecting all Kansans, including deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind individuals. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Stacy. We are going to go ahead and open it up to questions to all conferees, and the first question is from Representative Thomas.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate the conversations we've had in the office. So last year we had this bill, essentially same language, nothing's really changed, and it passed unanimously out of our committee. It passed the Senate, I believe 38-0 or 38-1. This year, same language, same everything. It was brought up that essentially the story was anybody with a little bit of experience, why can't they help? Why can't they be utilized in this role? And essentially the idea was this would cost interpreter jobs. And it ended up being a significantly different vote on the other side of the rotunda. Number one, I don't really understand that, because if anybody's going to be able to tell us it'll cost jobs, it would be the conferees, both written and verbal. Could you just simply, anybody sort of respond to that? Because I supported this bill last year, and I'm going to support it again this year. I just don't understand why there was sort of this, I don't want to use the term attack, but there was sort of this idea that this is going to cost interpreter jobs when you guys literally designed this bill to help your industry and help with regards to communication between the deaf and hard of hearing and everybody else. So I don't see how that applies here. So if you could just clarify that point that was raised from the other side, I would appreciate it.
Go ahead.
This is Robert here. Good question. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify. This bill is not minimizing or removing any jobs from anyone. Over the past 5 years, we had started with 250 interpreters in our state, and currently we hold over about 400 interpreters within our state. So once this bill was brought up, work has continued. Interpreters who are currently already in our system. There were some concerns, though, that were unqualified interpreters that were still within the system who were causing harm. And often, and because of the increased numbers of interpreters, the understanding was that the demand increased. therefore bringing in some unqualified interpreters and seeing that the demand was high could enter the field. And so there was a lot of examples of unqualified interpreters, and especially in the school systems. And the school systems are saying, why would this unqualified interpreter go ahead and apply for this position when they are not qualified? And the schools have actually terminated several unqualified interpreters versus other interpreters are scheduled elsewhere in other schools who are waiting for committed for a full semester before they can find other opportunities to work elsewhere and looking for opportunities to fill need. So the qualified interpreters have reached out to me saying, where are their job openings? And we've still had high numbers looking to hire qualified interpreters. So we're trying to ensure and that the unqualified interpreters are reduced so that the qualified interpreters have continued work available. So there are some who are not working, but as far as them losing their jobs, I don't know how we can say that when they're already in the system, they're already registered with us, and we've had an influx of interpreters numbers in the state.
Just a quick follow-up. So what you're saying, basically, if I understand correctly, is you're wanting to ensure through certification that the interpreters you have out there are qualified and will do the job to the best of their ability. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. That is accurate. And the interpreters also adhere to a code of ethics as well.
Representative Samsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for everybody being here today, including the proponents, and also those that have altered their video when not needed. The audio is coming through much better. We appreciate that. I want to commend this group. They've been through the hard work of doing this through the process the way it should be done. So that this committee knows this was actually one of the casualties of COVID last year. But for that, we would have got this done for them a year ago, and we've been farther along with good things that they are doing. They also had the unfortunate experience of having to work with me. There were a couple things in that bill that I thought we should tweak. And so I will open that up to the proponents for a question if they would like to speak to what those concerns were. But not to put them on the spot, but if they would like to and what they've done to adjust that. But even without that testimony, and actually they've been reaching out to me this session actually, and with all of the other things we've been juggling with COVID, it's been difficult to work on those. But it has my full support. Hopefully that doesn't scare other people off. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but I do hope this passes as quickly as possible and we get it signed into law. And if the proponents would like to speak to some of those minor adjustments, if the chairman permits, that would be great, but otherwise we'll get on. I won't be tedious and we'll get this thing done. Thank you.
Does any of the proponents like to address that? If not, we'll proceed. It sounds like his questions have already been answered. And we'll go on with further questions. Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on Representative Thomas's comments. Is there any outreach to unqualified interpreters in an attempt to get them qualified?
Yes. Yes. We have about 63 interpreters who are currently on our registry list, who are on a provisional registry that we have recruited them to be on our list and providing external support, more supervisory plans, and to help them continue to enhance and build their skill sets. And hopefully they will become fully registered soon.
Representative Burkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few quick questions, if you may. What is the fee to become registered?
We have proposed about 2 or 3 years ago that it would be a fee of $100 every 2 years and possibly $60 annually for the provisional registry. We feel that that is a reasonable cost that would help support the expenses and also to be able to build more opportunities for training and advancement for those interpreters. Previously, when we had and housed the certification exam, we charged $330 for applicants to take that exam. So I feel $100 every 2 years was fair and equitable.
Thank you. And then just one more quick one. On the part about video interpreting, so if you're an out-of-state interpreter who has their appropriate credentials, I assume would you still make them go through everything like fingerprinting and all else that's laid out here in the bill? I'm just worried that might make it harder for people to get remote interpreters.
That's a very good question. We recognize that there are a lot of video remote interpreters, VRI, who work through agencies, and those agencies already do require background checks in and of themselves for their staff members. So, but if there are some individual practitioners who offer that service independently from an agency, we would charge possibly a $30 fee for that background check for those providers. But I don't think many individuals will be paying that fee because most of them already work through an agency or an entity, and seeing more increased opportunities if they work through an agency. We're more specifically targeting those individuals, those interpreters who work in person and person to person to minimize the barriers and the risk.
Thank you.
Representative Estes.
So the only person who would be at risk of losing their job is somebody who's unqualified and doesn't want to become qualified.
Not necessarily. Actually, if there's we had an interpreter in a situation, we gave them a 2-year time period of a provisional registration to become in compliance with CEUs and credentialing. So we don't want anyone to lose their job. We're here to give them options and help them advance.
Thank you, and that's my point. I support this bill because I've taught newcomer English, and so being in the classroom and seeing families rely on interpreters, I know how it feels to be at the mercy of a child translating for you or someone else, and you don't sometimes have confidence that the very important information you want to convey is being conveyed, and I think this bill is very important.
All right, we had a follow-up. Oh, did you have? Okay. Representative Samsel, did you have a follow-up? Never mind.
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm just slow and left my hand up. Thank you.
All right. Further questions from the committee? Seeing none. Committee, you also have written proponent testimony. I think there's 12 of those that are in your folders. There are no opponent or neutral conferees. Is there anybody else online or here in the room that was wishing to testify or to speak? Seeing none. Committee, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing. And again, with no opponents or neutral conferees, and after last year and this year, I do think we could go ahead and proceed with working this bill at this time. So the chair would entertain a motion. Representative Sanders makes the motion to pass out House Bills or Senate Bill 185 favorably. Is there a second? Representative Estes seconds. I saw several hands, but hers went up first. Discussion on the motion. Representative Thomas.
I just want to reiterate that this is legislation that is long overdue. The language has not changed. This was unanimously passed out, and I think this is great legislation and a great bipartisan effort here. And I want to thank everybody that worked on this bill, and I'm happy to support this.
Further questions or discussion? All right. Well, I think we can proceed without further ado. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The The ayes have it. Motion passes. All right. Let's keep moving, committee. Yesterday's hearing, unfortunately, didn't happen, so it's happening today. And Nick, we're going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 51. Could you give us a brief overview? Thank you.
Yes, so Committee Senate Bill 51 would create a new law requiring the Kansas State Department of Education and the Department for Children and Families to prepare a Kansas Foster Care Children Annual Academic Report Card. This report card would be required to be submitted to the House and Senate Education Committees in each January. And you can see the information that it includes in the bill. It's academic achievement measures, expulsions that occurred for foster care students, assessment scores, and kind of enrollment numbers. The term foster care student under the bill would mean any individual who is in the custody of the Department for Children and Families at any time when such student attended school during the school year. And the definition of school would mean any school of a school district or any non-public school accredited by the State Board of Education. So it would capture both public and non-public accredited schools. This would take effect upon publication in the statute book, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when you say publish, does that mean that becomes a public record, or is that just on kind of a need-to-know basis sort of thing?
So this report would be a public record. So it would be kind of aggregate data, kind of overall graduation rate, the number and percentage of students in foster care who are going to the next grade level, data of that nature, kind of high level data to show what's happening with foster care students.
But no individual's name would be made known.
I don't believe so. I think the department would be publishing that data on an aggregate, at the aggregate level on a kind of high level basis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions from the committee for Nick? Seeing none, thank you, Nick. We're going to go ahead and get into proponent testimony, and we have the honor of having Mark Tallman back. Welcome to the committee, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Proponent, right?
Pardon me? Yes, I am here as a proponent. Happy to be here as a proponent. This is another bill some of you may remember was working through the process last session. I believe it ended up being bundled with several other bills, was vetoed, not over this provision. The governor has actually issued an executive order starting this process. I believe there actually already has been the first edition made available, or at least in draft form. We'll tell you, last year we were not supporting, we were not opposed, we hadn't taken a position, but based on some of the concerns we've seen, our members actually adopted a statement around putting more focus on addressing the needs of foster students. So you know, the numbers are not good. We know we've got a lot of work to do in this area. School districts can't solve all of that problem, but we think this creates a better illustration of what the challenges are, and we think will help us continue to get better. So happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
And we'll hold questions to the end. Next up is Rachel Marsh. Welcome to the committee, Rachel. Is Rachel online? Are you muted? Maybe she's not available at this time, so no, she not. Okay, we will just consider her testimony as written, and we will move on to Scott Henricks. Welcome to the committee, Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Scott Henricks. I'm with DCF. I'm the Director of Permanency. And as previously mentioned, Senate Bill 51 would establish in statute the requirement for DCF and Department of Education to jointly prepare a education report card for children in foster care. DCF is supportive of this as it would codify the executive order, which is 20-53, and the collaboration would continue going forward. And being in statute, it would continue throughout future administrations. In reference to the executive order, which started the process, as was previously mentioned, that initial report was submitted to state and House education committees on January 15th, as was required by the order. That first report was created by the agencies using DCF data to identify students in foster care, and then combined with the Department of Education records on those students. The data required in the executive order is the same data that is listed in Senate Bill 51. And that data includes obviously the total number of foster care students who are enrolled. We look at numbers and percentages of graduation rates, those students promoted to the next grade level. We look at the suspensions, the length of suspensions, and expulsions. There's a breakdown of standardized testing scores for children in foster care. We look at the number enrolled in preschool age at-risk programs or those participating in mental health intervention team or similar programs. And then it was mentioned earlier, there are no names identified. This is all aggregate level data, and there is a breakdown on race and ethnicity for each data set. And then going forward in the future, it is permissible if both agencies agree to add any relevant educational data into the report. So that individual report, which was submitted to this committee as well, I believe as part of the testimony, I want to point out that we did identify an error in the initial report from January 15th. KSDE reached out to us saying that they believe there was a miscalculation in terms of students promoted to the next grade level. On the initial report, it indicates 50.7%. Well, with the recalculation, it was determined that number is actually 79.5%. So that is an improved outcome. And we're really appreciative about the collaboration with the Department of Education. They've been very helpful. We believe this is a great partnership going forward, and looking forward to that. So DCF supports providing as much information on foster care education to the governor, to the legislature, to the public as possible. We think that this data can be used to identify gaps in service and improve our practices. We prioritize educational stability and outcomes for our students in foster care. We believe that the foster care report card is another tool to help support those efforts. It's also an opportunity for us to spotlight and improve the educational services for kids in foster care. So we're working with our case management providers in this area. They're working with local school districts. So we definitely want to continue the spotlight on this. So the department stands in full support of Senate Bill 51, as it will ensure that the report card continues going forward. So that concludes my testimony. I'll gladly accept any questions you may have at the appropriate time. Thank you.
That's the appropriate time. I did have a question just in regards to the error you spoke of. That's a pretty significant error. What was the source of the error? How was it found and corrected? And are we confident in the new reporting results are accurate?
Sure. And this was the Department of Education reached out to us saying that they believe that they had miscalculated the original report. So there was a recalculation. I can provide the specific information to you. I don't have it right in front of me about how the reconfiguration occurred. But yes, it was a significant increase, almost 1,800 students, I believe.
You might get that to Deborah, my assistant, and then we'll get that out to the committee.
Will
Representative
do.
Sanders, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This would be for Mr. Tallman. Did I hear you correctly say that you've got a significant problem? Could you briefly define the parameters of that problem? For example, what are graduation rates for foster care children versus non-foster care?
Representative, I don't have those numbers, but I know there is a significant gap. Foster care kids graduate at a far lower rate than the overall aggregate. One thing I think we've seen as we've looked more into this is sometimes because these kids maybe move from district to district, particularly high school to high school, it becomes difficult sometimes to track credits. You know, often, of course, these children, they're dealing with a lot of issues in their lives, so they fall behind. So there's a number of reasons, and I think from our perspective, we're just going to have to try to look for ways to better address those problems. And another issue I'll just mention that it's not specifically, I think, tied to educational outcomes, but becomes part of that is some of the issues in making sure records get transferred and all of those things. We just know we have to do a better job. So
do you have any way of knowing at this point if the problem is stabilized, getting better, getting worse?
I don't know as I can speak to that, Representative. I think part of the reason we are supporting this bill is it does create a baseline to kind of say where we are now and try to work toward.
Thank you. Mr. Henricks, do you have any comments on those questions?
Thank you for the opportunity. I would just like to add that our child welfare case management providers they do have corrective action or action plans, in place where they are working closely with the school districts on transfer of record. That has recently began in recent months, and we do feel like that we're seeing some improvement initially when it comes to the record transfer piece. There's methods of documentation in place, et cetera.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions from the committee? Representative Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Scott. Now that DCF has seen all of that information pulled into one centralized place, does DCF have thoughts as to what DCF will change to help each child reach his or her potential? And then I have a follow-up question.
Thank you for the question. I think being in its infancy, that we are still processing some of the initial data. We really want to drill down in those data sets to see if we can identify any gaps in services, and then work with KSDE about how we can improve this going forward. So a direct answer would be nothing yet, as we're still working with the initial data on this.
Well, I hope you'll keep us updated.
Absolutely.
Even though this is new data, does DCF have gut checks, kind of thoughts on what's the underlying cause?
Well, as was mentioned earlier, I think one aspect is the movement of foster children. As they move from placements, they often move school districts and schools, and that can be difficult on all parties involved. So we have really applied focus to placement stability, to reducing those number of moves. So we think that will be a big step in helping the educational stability as well.
I tend to think that you're right, and that's a big concern for me for these children. And as you guys look at the data sets, I don't know if it's possible for you to add in an angle where you can look at how many times some of these kids have been moved, and how many different school districts and how many different schools that they have attended. I think all of our hearts are in the right place, but the kids are not getting the opportunity that they need. I feel like we're failing them.
Thank you for that recommendation. We will definitely take that into consideration and work with the Department of Education and see if how we can monitor that.
You might report back to us too, just, briefly, as you begin to look at that. You will be in session for a while, and it'd be good to, you get that to Deborah, my assistant, and we'll get that, any preliminary information to the committee. Further questions from the committee?
Absolutely.
Anybody online?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sanders.
Thank you. This may not be the appropriate time, but I noticed that the Board of Education is neutral. What could you possibly let us know what concerns they might have that doesn't cause them to be a proponent?
Thomas has a response.
They were here at one of our hearings, and I asked them that same question. Essentially what they said, being the ones that sort of vote on this policy stuff, they decided to be neutral on all these positions, I believe, unless I'm incorrect, just because these are things that may come to their desk to vote on. So they stay neutral on anything that has to do with policy or education.
So is your sense they're supportive of this?
I don't know.
I would think that would be a yes. I think it's safe to say that. I think we all are supporting it. It's necessary. And I guess even as a follow-up to Scott, I mean, I like this idea. It's good. It's overdue. But I would imagine that even without this, there's been some efforts to do this without this legislation or executive order. And so I'm believing that you've been involved with efforts from the past to make this a tool that can help you guys to continue to do better from what you've done in the past, because we all know we need to do better. So.
Yes, absolutely. We think this is another tool that will help it, but there's been several measures in place in terms of the record transfers and just educational services in general. So this really just solidifies it, and we feel like it will keep it in the forefront.
You might, even with previous efforts, as you've tracked and tried to do better without this type of report card, if there's anything that you have that might be beneficial to the committee from your past in the last few years, if you'd forward that to Deborah, my assistant, we'll get that out too. Because I think that we talk about this being a baseline, and that's true, but I know there's more information out there from the past that I think it'd be good to be reviewing that information. So I'd appreciate that. Further questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, you also have proponent testimony from Mike Fonkert, Kansas Appleseed, and then also we've already discussed the neutral testimony. Anybody else in the audience wishing to speak today on Senate Bill 51 or online? Seeing none, committee, we will go ahead and close the hearing on Senate Bill 51. And again, I do believe this is also worthy of our attention today. And with that, committee, I would welcome a motion. Representative Estes makes the motion to pass out Senate Bill 51 favorable. Second from Representative Stogstill. Discussion from the committee. I know we've had good discussion in this hearing, and I think, even last year with the veto, we all knew that this needed to take place, and I'm glad that we're going to continue to focus on this. And I just hope, again, that this doesn't just become another something that doesn't rise to the potential of helping our foster care kids. And so without further comments or questions, and again, I don't want to rush, but if there's nothing, I think there's pretty much agreement that we do need to move forward and kick this bill out. I will go ahead and move forward and ask for all those in favor to signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We got you. Opposed, nay? The ayes have it. All right. Hey, Samson, you might want to turn your mic down. No. Just kidding. All right, committee, we do have some other bills, and we're making good time today. We did have one bill that was heard before turnaround, and it was blessed. And I know my vice chairman has been working on this issue over the last month. And so I'm going to go ahead and allow him to get his, I think you have a balloon amendment that you wanted to,
I got to make the motion.
yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank the folks that have worked with me on this. Representative Anderson had a hand in it. I know I've had many conversations with a few representatives on this. I move that the committee passes out House Bill 2301 favorably for passage.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second? Representative Sanders seconds. All right, we'll open up discussion and possible amendment.
I do have one amendment that affects the language that I will pass out with Ms. Deborah's help.
Thank you, Deborah. As we finish handing that up, I think Nick might, do you want Nick to jump in or do you want, okay, Nick, let's go ahead and let you just walk us through the balloon language.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So committee, what this balloon does is it would first off strike new sections 1 and section 2 of this bill. And what those sections were doing was with regard to personal financial literacy courses requiring those courses to 1, fulfill a half math credit in high school, and then number 2, requiring colleges to accept that half math credit as part of their admissions policies. So it strikes those 2 sections, and what it does is inserts this balloon language that you see, and this would require a course of instruction in line with the standards that would be established for this personal financial literacy course by the State Board of Education. It would require this course of instruction in grade 11 or 12 for high school graduation. The bill would continue to provide that the State Board of Education must provide curriculum standards relating to this grade 11 or 12 personal financial literacy course. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And committee, I'm just trying to remember, because I know we made the initial motion on the bill, but I don't think we did. Nick, did we make the motion on the amendment? Yeah, the balloon language? I just don't.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
All right, we have a motion from, just wanted to make sure we're doing what we need to do to the amendment on the balloon language that's been passed out. To we have a second, Representative Sanders seconds. All right, now we'll get into discussion.
Okay, now I'm not going to take credit for all this amendment. I have to spread a little bit of fun around here. This amendment, initially when we did this, it left it to the development of the financial literacy policy. This actually changed it to a requirement for graduation. There was concern about a couple of pieces that we wanted to address. The half a credit for math. There was some conversation amongst representatives and others about it being required to be a math credit. So we said, okay, we'll just make it a required course. It doesn't have to be math. And then also, I know the good representative from Johnson County, can we say names in committee?
I think we can.
All right, just for the sake of saving time, I know Representative Poskin had an amendment that had to do with the college entrance piece, and I put that in here just to essentially to save time, but I thought it was a friendly amendment and I would have supported it, so I just wanted to make sure she got a little shout out as well for this amendment.
Further discussion on the balloon amendment. Representative Stockstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure I have this correct, that this financial literacy course would become a a full semester course, full year course? What would it be?
Semester.
Pardon?
Semester.
Semester? Okay. What are you going to take out? I mean,
Not-
right now, if you're going to put in a semester class, something's got to be taken out. I mean, it's like when we ask a student or when we ask teachers to teach 7 hours a day, the appropriate school boards make those decisions on what curriculum to include in that 7-hour day. And if you're going to include more into that 7-hour day, something has to come out. So are we saying that we're going to insert this instead of a semester of algebra or geometry or calculus or what?
And I think, Nick, and you might be able to help a little bit. It's my understanding that even over a 4-year high school career, that individual local districts have the ability, to include a half credit without dropping something else because they have, over that period of time, more than what's necessary for graduation. And so this wouldn't impact and force something to be dropped. Would that be correct?
Well, that would be,
I was going to ask or my revisor just to make sure that my understanding was.
that would be, if you can't, you're making this a required course for graduation. So this course would be a mandatory course.
And I'll let
And so
Representative
it
Thomas
has to,
also
it's
respond.
something will have to be cut, whether it's another, well, it wouldn't be a mandatory course because this is one of the few things would be a mandatory course for actually graduating from high school. But another course that for like art or another subject area would have
An elective.
eliminated. Yeah.
Well, I disagree with that, and I think also the fact of the matter is we had the discussions, there were concerns brought to me, and rather than just say, forget it, I'm just going to do this as is, I took those into consideration, included those in my amendment. Had that come up, it would have been something we considered, but at this time, I don't agree.
Did you?
Yeah, I'm just saying that right now, if you have 4 years of high school, you've got so many half-year courses or semester courses, and this one would, and I'm sure that there's a certain number of required courses right now, and you're making this one a very important one, and that would be a required course. So I'm still think that there would have to be some substitution somewhere within the curriculum to make room for this.
Respectfully, I'll lay out my senior year class schedule. I was not required to take a math class, and I chose not to. I chose a half a semester of creative writing amongst my 2 choir classes, my music theory class, my AP class, and others, and I was able to choose 3 electives in my senior year, and American government was also a required course. So I just don't see the connection with removing another course.
And I can also tell you, there's a lot of school districts already doing this. I know my Valley Center School District has this as a requirement. And again, this is an issue that's been around for a while, and I know I've been around for a while, and I know that we've had this discussion many times. And I'm trying to remember the agreement that was reached, I think, was that 2015? I think. Do you remember the details of that in regards to over the last 6 years, what's happened since that agreement was reached?
It was an agreement between the chairman of this education committee and the commissioner on education that every district would develop a financial literacy course. We heard testimony during our hearing that some districts do have it. However, some are not all.
Mr. Chairman, I believe you were headed down the right road when you were seeking input from the reviser. So Nick, do you know or do you have easy access to how many credits are currently required?
And it's a local decision, but I think there's some.
So there's, the state board has minimum high school graduation requirements. And requiring local boards of education to have these minimum requirements. So 4 units of English, 3 units of history, 3 units of science, 3 units of math, 1 unit of physical education, 1 unit of fine arts, and 6 units of elective courses. And then this guidance document by the state board also says that any local board of education may increase the number of units of credit required for graduation. And then it also talks about some waiver revisions as well for certain students.
Thank you, Nick. I think I have a question from Representative Whitmore.
Mr. Chair, I had a question on the balloon amendment. It seems to apply to parochial and private schools. I didn't know that we could enforce in private schools.
Nick, do you want to respond to that?
I'm sorry, I could not hear the question at all.
I'm sorry, I wasn't talking to my microphone. So in the balloon, it says private and parochial schools. I didn't know that we could enforce things like this on the private or parochial schools, but that's a question. For you.
Yeah, certainly. So the state board does accredit certain private schools through their accreditation process. So I presume through that accreditation process, graduation requirements could be set as well. This is fitting this balloon into current law with regard to the history and United States government course that's required under current law. And you may recognize this provision as well from our civics bill debate, which the civics bill was also inserting requirements into this current statute as well.
My mic off. I'm sorry. So I'm going to ask my question again because I probably wasn't very clear. So my very direct question is, can the Kansas legislature enforce curriculum requirements on private schools?
So my answer to that, this is requiring the State Board of Education to develop curriculum standards and then requiring a course of instruction to be provided on personal financial literacy based on those curriculum standards. Again, this is fitting it into the current law where the current law states that all accredited high schools, public, private, or parochial, have to give a certain course of instruction on United States government and civil government requirements. So current law is already doing something of this nature.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Estes.
Okay, so the other representative and I both noticed that, and I wonder if if what was originally intended was between all and accredited, should have been Kansas Department of Education. So it would read all Kansas Department of Education accredited high schools. And if that's what was originally intended, perhaps a substitute motion is in order.
I'll let the maker.
Are you talking section 1, letter B?
Yes.
That is already, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, current law. So what is underlined is what is changing. So I believe that's already in current law.
That is correct. So in this balloon, and I should have described this, the strikeout language, this is current law. Section 1 is this balloon is amending current law 723217. So what you're seeing there, the underlying language is what would be new in the current statute, whereas the strike-through language would be what is deleted from the current statute. So inserting language in front of non-new language, or as suggested, would be amending the other requirements of this current law. But I see what you're saying, and there would be avenues to Representative Estes to target this course if the will of the committee target this course towards either KSDE state board accredited schools or public schools, if that's the will of the committee.
And I got what you were saying, and what I'm suggesting is just a technical fix that was for an unintended error when the original bill was passed.
Okay, I'll let the maker, is that a technical correction that you'd like to, or you want to respond, ask Nick to see if it's, if it meets your intent, or?
The intent was to add the underlying language, not change the rest of the law. The law currently states all accredited high school. That's in statute and in law. If we want to amend that, that would be fine. I believe that would take a simple motion to amend the statute there.
Well, you could do it with a substitute, I guess, to your motion.
Nick, would that be an acceptable procedure to amend the current statute and change all accredited high schools to the language she's suggesting? I don't want to put words in her mouth, sorry.
That's certainly something that could be done, and the language would probably read something along the lines of all high schools, public, private, or parochial, accredited by the State Board of Education shall give a course of instruction, something along those lines.
That sounded good.
If the motion is made, I would be happy to second.
Well, I'll let you're the maker, and I think she's suggesting that you could do that yourself. All right.
All right, sounds good. So I make the motion that we
Amend the balloon.
amend the balloon, a substantive motion to amend the balloon that changes the term all accredited high schools, public, private, or parochial, to the language Nick just said.
And a second from Representative Estes. Okay, we're on the new substitute motion. Further questions from the committee? I had Representative Samsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate the good work of the vice chairman here, and of course, in a similar but different bill, of the chairman here and everybody else at the table. I like 99% of this. The one where I have a little bit of heartburn is what strikes as perhaps a mandate, which I understand this is already in law in some ways, versus I listened to the KNEA representative and suggested he thought a resolution might be more appropriate. I don't have, I mean, teamwork makes the dream work. I said that on the floor earlier, as I also said, I don't want to be tedious, but as long as we're all working together, I'm happy to support what the vice chairman is doing today. I do wonder a little bit out loud if a resolution encouraging our folks across the street to do that might be beneficial for everybody. But those were just my comments. I did not know how much work has been done with those folks. I'm hopeful and optimistic. I know the vice chairman's been working his tail off, and we've all been short on time. So I perhaps just as a, not necessarily a question, we'll keep this moving, but perhaps a comment that might help all of us. Thank you.
Representative Thomas, do you wish to respond, or?
I was actually going to address that in my close.
Well, I'll wait till you're close.
That's fine. We can
Representative Schreiber. Is Representative Schreiber online, and are you unmuted? Representative Schreiber.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, sorry about that. When Representative Stogsdale was talking about the balloon amendment, I didn't have it in front of me. I just pulled it up. But if I'm reading it right, it will be a graduation requirement from high school to take this course?
Correct.
Okay. And they have to take it within grades 11 or 12?
Correct.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
I apologize for my long drawn-out answer to that question.
It wasn't tedious. Representative Stogsdale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think another problem we have with this, the same one we discussed last year, was who's going to teach this course. Over the last few years, especially in some of our smaller cities and towns around the state, we've had problems finding enough math teachers, science teachers, those sorts of things. And this is going to be exacerbated by what we've gone through with the COVID virus, because we've lost a lot of teachers across the state. And it looks to me like who are you going to have teach this class? A biology teacher, a PE teacher, driver's ed teacher? I mean, who's going to teach this if there's no one qualified in that high school to teach that class? And here we're saying that you cannot graduate from that high school, but what if you have a teacher teaching that class that is really unqualified or has the background to teach a course in financial literacy? This is more than math. This was a field I worked in for 8 years with the high-tech industries in Kansas, and I mean, it goes way beyond just mathematics and so on to teach this class. And this, to me, is almost, you have problems finding those kinds of people with those kind of qualifications at the college level. And I would hate to think that some of our students, that their high school diplomas would be based on the fact that they had to pass a course that a teacher's giving that's unqualified to teach that course. So where are we going to get these people?
I was under the impression that according to the contract, every district should have already developed it. Most of the districts already have teachers that are teaching it, so there won't be that much of a change. So
I'm just wondering what their qualifications are, though, because, I mean, if it's a math course, you would think that they would have to have a background in math and a specialty in financial literacy. And again, that is different than teaching geometry or algebra, that sort of thing. It goes way beyond that. And again, we are having problems getting enough math teachers and science teachers around the state. So if people are teaching it right now, they may be unqualified really to teach it right now. I mean, I think it just makes sense that if we're having problems finding these kinds of teachers, some of these teachers that will be teaching this will not be qualified.
I think that's a valid point. However, when the first initial bill and the hearing was brought up, it was mentioned that requiring it to be a half a math credit would be a mistake, which is why I removed that in an effort to compromise.
Mr. Chairman, I call the question on the amendment.
We had the question called, and I do think I had no more questions listed on my discussion. So we will go ahead and move to letting you make a closing argument unless you're wanting to just.
Somebody just said we lost audio, so I want to make sure we have the audio up before I close.
Do we have audio up for the online people?
I can hear you.
Yes. Yes. All right, you can close.
Okay. So as we come out of the COVID crisis, I think it's now more important than ever that we adapt to the changes being brought to us by the COVID pandemic, by the fact that we have people that are now depending on government to provide them unemployment and help that they need, when if we just simply give them the proper tools to be successful in high school before they graduate, they will go farther, they will do far better. This contract that was signed in 2015 between the chair of this committee and the State Board of Education said the district shall adopt and develop a financial literacy policy. We are 6 years beyond the signing of that contract. At what point do we as the legislature say, you're not holding up to your end of the bargain, and we decide to take legislative action? A little more perspective. There's 3 terms for all of us in this House is how long we've given them. I think the time to use the purview of this body within Article 6, Section 1 of the Constitution to do our job and put the children first. That is the intent of this bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I close.
All right, you've heard the motion. I'm going to have people raise hands on this motion. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Okay, I'm counting. I see 1, 2.
I from Representative Samsel, and we actually lost audio completely for a little bit, but we caught the vast majority of it.
Okay.
But video is not possible at this time.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can we see in the other room, or I guess I'll just go peek. Opposed, raise your hand. 2.
And I'm no online.
All right, we have 8 opposed. Chair breaks the tie, voting aye. The motion passes. Back on the bill. Would you like to close, or are we ready to? Further discussion now that the amendment is passed. Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to jump back to a question. I have 2 points to make here that was brought up earlier about the addition of a half credit to the graduation requirements. It will displace elective credits. Make no doubt about that. So instead of something else, they will be taking that. And I will say that that will not necessarily affect somebody who is lazing around through school and just taking certain classes. But my work as a college admissions consultant, I tell you that it will affect our high-level students who are looking to be accepted at a highly selective college. End of story. They are already taking summer courses. They are taking chemistry in the summer so they can get all their AP. We talked about engineering students who want to get ahead in that regard. This will be a problem for them, and they will be taking these classes in the summer, and they will be much more stressed out because of it. Make no doubt about that. And then my second thought, hold on a minute, was with regard to the contract between this body and the State Board of Education. The actual wording of it says, in light of all this, we strongly encourage each local Board of Education that has not yet done so to pass and implement a policy on the instruction and the desired outcomes of personal financial literacy education in the manner best suited to your district. So we're the ones who are reneging on our contract here to let the schools and the individual school boards and the local boards of education to determine what their policy on personal financial literacy is. And then we are also making a mandate for it to be a high school requirement, high school graduation requirement. In light of those issues, I will not be supporting this bill.
Further discussion on the motion, Representative Stockstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Poskin brings up a really good point that this will, in the eyes of some elite universities and so on, and even some of the state universities that we have kids applying to and so on, will see that as a downgrade in their resume that they send to these schools for admission. And they will look at that as a lower qualification and may actually keep some of these kids from being accepted at those schools. And again, same thing, this will replace some form of curriculum in the curriculum of every school. This is a mandated course now, and again, it will be taught in some school districts by unqualified people, because out of all the school districts all across the state of Kansas, not every single one of those school districts are going to have people that are qualified to teach this course. Probably more of them not having qualified teachers than have qualified teachers. And the last point is, this is just another incursion on the responsibilities and rights of the Kansas State Board of Education and local school boards all across our state. You know, our constituents elect us to come to Topeka to do a certain job, and they know what that job is. They also elect the members of the State Board of Education and our local boards of education to deal with these kinds of educational issues, and especially curriculum development. That's their purview. That's their job. That's what they were elected by the same people who elect us to do. And I think a resolution requesting that the Board of Education look at this, I have no problem with that whatsoever. But when we get involved as legislators here in making curriculum decisions, and in some cases, like we've already done, down to the very test, and then making those decisions required for graduation, that is just wrong. That is not what we're supposed to be doing as legislators up here. That is the responsibility and the right of the State Board of Education and our local school boards. So I'll be voting no against this.
Further questions or discussion? Representative I just went blank. Myers.
Thank you. In doing the research that I have on this, it looks like 2016, there was a survey regards to this. And in 2016, we had nearly 98% of school districts having either a financial literacy policy in place, under development, or even in place and partially implemented. I would think that maybe if you wanted to do anything on this, we should probably pursue getting another survey done to see where school districts actually are with this. Because it looks like we may already be well on that way, and we're debating something that has no merit or need to.
Okay, Representative Featherston.
Thank you. I want to say I do think financial literacy is important. I was raised in a very strict financial house, and that's important. I don't think that class would have replaced my AP calculus class that got me out of 8 hours of credit at K-State. My concern with the bill, besides overreach, is I looked at my 3 districts, and they require anywhere from 23.5 to 24 credits to graduate. And it's my 23.5 credit district requires the finance class. The other 2 require computer tech instead. And I know the switch in the financial class requirement was they got rid of computer tech, which is a whole different issue. But I'm concerned that if we already have 24 credits required and you want to take band or choir or theater or drill team is in the school day, at least one of my districts now, then you can't do it. And that just concerns me for all these electives. And I would comment that, you know, Ms. Lerner-Sexton would have missed your voice so much, Mr. Thomas, in choir. And I would hate for kids to have to make those choices between like music where that might be the spot where they can let it all hang out for the day and just be in a different group of kids versus they have to take this financial class to graduate.
All right, Representative Sampson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay? I do apologize. We've
Yes.
been having audio issues.
You're good.
Awesome. I will say, again, as I said earlier, I agree with the distinguished representative from Prairie Village in many respects. I actually would prefer a resolution as well, but that's not what's before me at the moment. Anybody in this room and others had an opportunity to bring a resolution, much like we've had for the last many years. Unfortunately, audio cut out, so I hope I'm not repetitive or tedious of what the vice chairman said previously. But I mean, I agree. We do have unqualified teachers across Kansas. But that's going to be the case whether we pass this bill or not. I have 5 school districts ranging from 1A to 4A. I've spent tons of time in those classrooms, and these kids are not getting financial literacy that they need. I'm not blaming anybody for that. Our administrators are overwhelmed with mental health issues, kids who don't have parents through no fault of their own. And I don't mean that in any negative way, but we have serious challenges in front of us. But I sharply disagree with what the role of this legislature is. We have outstanding State Board of Education members, and I don't want this to be taken away negatively. But there's a reason, I mean, when I mentioned earlier, we walked through the basement of our building, and the Kansas Constitution says all political power is inherent in the people. The more we keep that power to the ground, which is often rank and file members in this chamber, the better we are. And I get local control, but local control is not perfect either. I mean, I use as an example our substitute teacher situation right now. I went and got an emergency substitute teaching license because we had nobody to sit in our schoolrooms. Our elementary kids, which I love, but are the most challenging, that's where the highest demand was. But if we're being honest, our local school board officials are paying them less than $11 an hour, which is less than what we make here in the Capitol building. And so my point with that is, I mean, they can go down the street to the gas station and make $15 an hour, not because it's minimum wage and mandated, but because in our part of the state, it's growing rapidly, and that's what the market pays. If we paid our substitute teachers a little bit more, or our financial folks a little bit more, our teachers a little bit more, we maybe wouldn't have as much of a qualification problem. So I think, again, teamwork makes the dream work. But the bill that's before us today, I mean, how many times have I seen a state school board of education member knock the doors in my district? I love my person, but I haven't seen them out once knocking doors. I know what the vibe of my school district, or what my my folks on the ground are, and they tell me over and over, financial literacy is a serious concern. I see it firsthand. So, all things being equal, this maybe is not my preferred approach, but like I said on the floor earlier, it's progress, not perfection. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate everybody's time in this discussion, but I will fully support this and keep the discussion moving forward. Thank you.
I think we've had good discussion. I'll let Representative Thomas close on his motion.
I appreciate what Mrs. Sexton taught me. She had me 3 hours a day my senior year. She had me in 2 choir classes and music theory. 2 choir classes, music theory. So I assure you, oh, and I had orchestra. So I assure you that my 4 hours of my 7-hour day being completely music, I had plenty of time for music. My creative writing course was an elective. I chose that because I needed to. That was a full semester. I was writing music at the time, so I turned in cheesy song lyrics I'd written as my poems, and they got vastly rejected. And yet I still moved to Nashville anyway. But anyway, that's beside the point. So this can happen, and I heard some contradictory statements, and I'm going to address those briefly before I close. We heard that we have unqualified teachers. We heard that I think 96%, I believe, was the number given, are teaching it. And then we've heard that there's already districts requiring it, and that most districts are teaching it. We have the staff in place. We have those courses already being taught. And again, I will reiterate, our constitutional duty, this is within our purview. Article 6, Section 1. I encourage everybody to read it. We are not acting out of line here. What we are saying is after 5 years of a contract, we're tired of waiting. We're tired of this relationship between us and them sort of being publicly laughed at because of things like this contract not being followed. I think this is fully necessary. I think as we come out of this pandemic, the long-term effects will be a very positive gain for our children, our state, our economy, and I think our kids will do so much better, and I believe this is a great effort to bring our kids up out of high school and be prepared to take on the world. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for your support for this bill, and I close.
All right. You've heard the motion. Again, we'll do this with raising hands. All those in favor, raise your right hand.
I vote from Representative Samsel. My apologies, I can't raise a hand.
Raise your hand. Schreiber, are you still online, Schreiber?
Yeah.
All right, so that's eight opposed, so it's an 8-8 tie. The chairman votes aye, the motion passes. Committee, I had hoped to get 2 more bills, but we've had a lot of fun today. We still have the chance to come back in tomorrow instead of rushing through 2 more. I'm going to adjourn for the day. We will meet again tomorrow at 1:30. The 2 bills that we have left to work, I think, will be pretty simple. It's Senate Bill 32, and I know Representative Poskin has an amendment on that. And then we have the balloon language that I proposed on Senate 62. So rather than rushing, let's just go ahead, adjourn, come back tomorrow and finish up those other 2 bills. With that, committee, we are adjourned.